Good evening, everybody.
Good
Our
evening.
wonderful crowd. Thank you all for coming out today to learn about our history. My name is Dr. Ted Vlados, for anybody I haven't met. I am the Archon Regional Commander, and I've been fortunate enough and blessed enough to be the chairman of the lecture series here at Holy Trinity for, I don't know, going on more than 20 years, which is amazing. It started with Father Gusakis. And we've had some very interesting lectures over the years. And tonight's is very important. I believe that this topic is something that a lot of Greek Americans do not know about, especially the younger generation, which is really a shame. It was a tragic event, a dramatic event. It had a lasting repercussion upon our faith and our ethnicity, and there wasn't much of an international hullabaloo about it. There really wasn't much of a response from the great powers. The United States, pretty silent. England, pretty silent. Even Greece was pressured into being fairly silent about it. And so it's important that we learn about this, and it's been now, how many years is that? 60 years? 70 years. I can't do math. I'm a doctor. In any case, this lecture tonight is being co-sponsored by Holy Trinity Lecture Series and by the Archons of Tampa Bay. Brother Gus Billinis, thank you for coming. Great to see you. I understand you're on a little holiday.
Long holiday.
And other fellow Archons, Joko Galakis is here. I think that's all of us today because a lot of our fellow Archons are traveling. So a lot of people ask me all the time, what is an Archon? The Archons are an institution formed here in the United States, the Order of St. Andrew, with the sole mission of supporting and defending the ecumenical patriarchate. Who is the ecumenical patriarch? Well, most of you all know that our equivalent of the Pope, if you will, the head bishop of all the bishops, is the ecumenical patriarch who resides in Constantinople, which is now known as Istanbul. And he's been there since 325 AD. From the time of Constantine. Now this one hasn't been there since 325. So sometimes he says that maybe he was. In any case, he's the 270th successor of the Apostle St. Andrew, who was St. Peter's older brother. So St. Peter is known as the founder of the Church of Rome and was the original Pope. And St. Andrew was the founder of the church in Byzantium, before it was Constantinople, and was the original patriarch of Constantinople. So he is our spiritual leader. There's a difference between him and the Pope, but he is our spiritual leader, and considered to be the first among equals over 300 million Orthodox Christians throughout the world. And of course, he lives in a land that is 99.9% Muslim, by occurrences of history, one of which we will learn tonight. And that has put incredible pressure on him and the institution. And it has been very tough for the community, the Greek Orthodox community in Constantinople to survive, and for the Patriarchate to survive. So when he gave an interview at 60 Minutes years ago, he was asked, do you sometimes feel crucified? And he says, yes, I do. And he really is. I mean, there are several points that we Archons have an issue with the government of Turkey. One is that there is no legal identity to the Patriarchate. The ecumenical Patriarchate is not recognized by Turkey other than he's the bishop of the local Greek population. His ecumenical title, which means throughout the world, is denied by Turkey. They closed the school of Chalki in 1971, which was a main training ground for the clergy in Constantinople and many of our leading bishops and metropolitans throughout the world. And we no longer have that facility, and they refused to let it reopen. They have stolen through various government devious tactics thousands of properties that supported the Patriarchate. And our own Archon Joseph Kokolakis is the head of the committee to help restore that if possible, or at least to bring that to the attention of the world. That out of 5,000 properties, I think we have 800 left. Is that right, Joe? Yeah. And I think does that sum it up, or did I leave one out? Talking points.
Hagia Sophia.
Well, Hagia Sophia is important, but the fact that they converted the greatest church in Christendom for over 1,000 years, became a mosque when they conquered Constantinople, and then remained a mosque until Ataturk turned it into a museum in 1933, I believe. And then it was at least open to us as a museum to be able to appreciate our Byzantine heritage until 2021, I think, when they converted it back to a mosque, because apparently there weren't enough mosques in Istanbul. Anyway, so today we have, again, like as I said, a very important topic, the Septembriana, or the September days, and the second fall of Constantinople, which I'm going to actually intervene and say it's in the third fall of Constantinople, but Alex can run with that as he wants. And we're very, very pleased to have as our guest speaker, Alexander Billinis, a friend of mine since we were in our 20s, I guess. He's a resident of Clemson, South Carolina. He's a lecturer at Clemson University in the Political Science Department and Clemson Honors College. He and his wife also own a commercial real estate company in Salt Lake City and residential properties in South Carolina. He is a doctoral candidate in digital history at Clemson University's History Department, where he also earned a master's degree in history a mere 3 years ago. Alex is not 20 anymore, right? But he got a master's 3 years ago. His master's thesis was on the Greek Merchant Marine. Now, what did he do before he decided to do a master's in history? Well, he has a law degree from American University, Washington College of Law. He's licensed to practice law in Illinois and Utah. His undergraduate degree was at Georgetown University. You can see he's a slacker. And in Eastern European Studies. Previous career experiences include freelance legal work, journalism, and 12 years working for various global banks in Salt Lake City, Chicago, Athens, Greece, and London. A proud Utah native, Alex is a US and a Greek citizen, and he speaks 7 languages. He has had a lifelong passion for Byzantium and Balkan history, and the history of the Greek and Serbian diasporas, having lived and worked in Greece, Bulgaria, and Serbia. He grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church, and his late father John was both an Archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and a member of the Archdiocesan Council. He met his wife of 22 years, Vilma, a native of Sombor, Serbia, at New Gračanica Serbian Orthodox Church and Monastery in Third Lake, Illinois, where they also married. They have 2 children in South Carolina. The family attends St. George Greek Orthodox Church in Greenville. He's also active in several Greek-American, Greek diaspora, academic, and community fora. He is particularly passionate about his ancestral land of Hydra and its nautical history. He is an honorary alumnus of the Hydra Nautical Academy Alumni Association, vice president of the Hydra American Society Miaulis, and director of East Mediterranean Business Cultural Alliance. His current research is on the Greek commercial network of the 19th century, which helped to establish the first Greek Orthodox Church in America in New Orleans in 1866. He is currently working on a book about this subject with Louisiana State University Press. He has published 2 books, The Eagle Has 2 Faces, Journey Through Byzantine Europe, which he gave us a talk on, what, about 6 years ago? Yeah, it was great to have him then. And Hidden Mosaics, an Aegean Tale. He is a regular contributor to the National Herald in New York, though his articles are usually true. And Neos Cosmos in Melbourne, Australia. It's a great pleasure to welcome back my good friend Alex Billinis. But before I let him begin, I'm going to ask Father James Rusakis to please give an opening prayer. That's right.
Thank you, Dad. Reciting together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from Lord Jesus Christ, our God, our power of strength, and fountain of wisdom, in whom we have our being. We thank you for this evening that you have gathered us to remember. It is always good to remember, especially the things that happened in the past that can forge our future. We ask you to bless our speaker this evening, to bless the Archons for presenting this program, and to bless us all and keep us safe all the days of our lives. Let us remember all those who gave their lives for their faith. We ask this in your holy name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. I think this is the first time I've ever been signed with
That's wonderful. Yes.
Fantastic.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Usually I don't need this, but thank you, Father. Thank you, Ted. Again, we go back a long ways. Congressman Billinis, it's a great honor to have you here. Clergy, assembled Archons, ladies and gentlemen, including a young man who's about 6 or 7 years old. This is wonderful to see this, as we say in Greek, synekia. So thank you to this young man for coming. This is a great honor to have a young man here. I think that's very, very important, because if these stories are told to the youth, it's encoded in them. So wonderful that he's here, and I'm so glad all of you are here. I'm quite vocal that this area of Florida is, in my opinion, this is the center of Hellenism in the United States. I believe that very strongly. Yes, congratulations, Ted. You should. And more of our people are coming here either from other parts of the United States, quite possibly many more from New York. But also, I love going to Tarpon Springs and hearing people with accents straight out of Athens or Thessaloniki. This is important to have that synekia, and I'm going to keep bringing up the synekia, because we want to have a synekia, we want to have a continuity, and that's on us to make that happen. So I stand corrected. The third fall of Constantinople, Ted is absolutely correct. We tend to ignore that first one. That was particularly upsetting, because when your fellow Christians are the ones that are planting the knife in your back, it tends to hurt more, although thankfully I've not experienced a knife either in my front or my back. But, apologize for the omission. It was indeed the third fall. And we'll get into why it's the third fall here. You have a newspaper showing the destruction, the shame of a nation. It's very much an incredible shame what the Turkish state did. And I think it's worth mentioning that we should differentiate the Turkish state and its thugs from some of the local Turks who often risk their lives to protect their Greek neighbors. I just want to bring that up because it's important. While we have every right to be horrified by some of the actions of states, often people make the difference and save some of our fellow Greeks. So, let's walk through some quick facts here. Over the course of 2 days in September 1955, there was a full-on pogrom of Orthodox Christians in Constantinople. You'll see from this newspaper, this was hardly the first time there was an outrage against the Greeks of Constantinople, and it wasn't the last. But the damage wrought there, can you hear me? Yeah. The damage wrought there was near existential, right? This was the beginning of the end. And far from a mob, as I hinted earlier, the gloved fist of the Turkish deep state was present. And we'll go into a few more details as the slides go on. The lessons of Germany's Kristallnacht against the Jews in 1938 were well learned by the Turkish state. And I'm going to come back to Kristallnacht several times in this discussion. And a lot of the genocide scholars that write about these outrages will come back to Kristallnacht. So Kristallnacht was a pogrom on the Jews of Germany in 1938. And clearly the Turks were watching on how to use instruments of terror against a minority. Particularly a minority that's well ensconced, that's culturally ensconced, and that's also prosperous. So we will learn today, if we don't already know, and again, many of you know this story very well, this was an indigenous population that was the majority, that became the minority. They were indigenous, and we talk a lot about indigenous rights. What about these guys? Well, somehow indigenous rights do not include the Greeks of Asia Minor or Constantinople. And talking about that in a wider forum is on us. We need to be talking about that. Further, the abuses against the Greek population of Constantinople, in spite of the fact that they were allowed to remain there by treaty, by the Treaty of Lausanne, signed in 1923, the outrages against the population continued. So in World War II, while Greece was under the boot of the Nazis and the Bulgarians and the Italians, the Turks took their own vengeance out against the Greeks, the Armenians, and the Jews with extortive taxation and with labor battalions. Many Constantinople Greeks lost their fortunes, and not a few lost their lives in labor battalions. Now, these weren't the labor battalions of the Armenian genocide, but nonetheless, they were abusive, and the trajectory was very clear. And in fact, the Turkish Republic from the 1940s was plotting. Is that better? I'm sorry. Was plotting to find ways to remove the Romi population for the 500th anniversary of the fall of Constantinople. And they almost did it. We have to ask ourselves, where will we be in the 600th anniversary? Well, I'll talk about demographics to give you my assessment on that. And as I've said, this was very much the synechia that started in the past and continues to this day. So, what was the pretext? Well, the pretext was, there were multiple pretexts. We can't ignore that Cyprus's independence struggle was in full swing. And the Turks, and let's not forget our friends the British, were very much against the independence struggle. And the ecumenical patriarch, Athenagoras, who had been here, refused to condemn the Cypriots in their fight for freedom, and that was certainly not forgotten. The other thing that's very important, and often happens when there's ethnic violence, is commercial resentment. In spite of the extortive taxes during World War II, the Greek community was wealthy. And here I'm going to stop for a moment and talk a little bit about my research, because I researched the Greek commercial elements and the Greek commercial network. Well, one of the main centers of that was, of course, Constantinople, right? So you had generational wealth. You had an incredibly cosmopolitan population with relations all over the world, including the United States, that remained in Constantinople for economic reasons, for cultural reasons, that was going to be a target. So, as always, you have both the Turks had a cultural reason for wanting to expel the Romani, but they also had a very important economic reason. And what better solution to get rid of a competitor and be a patriot, right? I mean, this is the oldest trick in the book, and it was certainly being used at the time. So the literal pretext was the supposed bombing of the Turkish consulate in Constantinople, in Thessaloniki. The porter had set the bomb around 1 a.m. on September 6th. September 6, 1955. There was no damage, and it was found to be a hoax. But then at 1700, the same day, so at 5 p.m. the same day, the pogrom starts. All right? So this is an era before Facebook, before social media, before everything going viral. And all of a sudden, you have a very well organized pogrom that takes place against the Constantinople Greeks. So to use a colloquial Greek phrase, to derby itan stimeno. This game was fixed well ahead of time. Right? The plan was there. I owe this picture to my good friend Ted, who had mentioned that he had seen it. What does that say in Turkish again?
Our father's house with a bomb.
Yeah, so Ataturk's home was bombed. So you can imagine this highly inflammatory newspaper article comes out just as everything else is coming together. So this was supposedly spontaneous. In this era, we would call it viral. Well, what's the reality? It was part of a long-term plan. The Turkish deep state had already marked this community for extinction. Cyprus was a pretext, and the fake attack was a pretext. And since we bring up the Nazis before, the Nazis were great at creating fake pretexts. So apparently on September 1st, the Germans didn't invade Poland. They were counterattacking because the Germans put concentration camp inmates in Polish uniforms and then shot them because, of course, the Poles started it. Well, here's the same thing. There was a fake pretext, which was part of a long-term plan. The press, for months before, were inciting the Turkish population against the Greeks, using the whole question of Cyprus, Cyprus's Turkish party, youth groups. In a month before, they had already started small-scale attacks on Greek churches. So the momentum was building up. Well, for the actual pogrom, the Turks commandeered 4,000 Istanbul taxis at the disposal of the rioters. They trucked in villagers and gave them axes, crowbars, and gasoline to set, basically fotiake çekuri, as we'd say in Greek. The police, by and large, in the initial period, stood by or protected Turkish businesses. And while there were local Istanbul Turks who were involved in the pogrom, I've heard countless examples of local Turks intervening on behalf of their Greek neighbors, shielding their Greek neighbors. I'd like to give a short anecdote from one of your fellow Archons, Harry Demopoulos, who lives between Pennsylvania and Naples, Florida. And he's given many talks on this subject. And he said in one case he gave a talk to a non-Greek audience, and a Turk who had graduated from Robert College, which was one of the most prestigious institutions in Istanbul, stood up and said, "I'm ashamed for what was done." However, his father was one of the shopkeepers who intervened on behalf of his Greek neighbors, and he was accused of being a Greek. And I won't go into details how he proved that he wasn't Greek, okay? But you get the point. So, I think it's important to differentiate between the Turks who protected their fellow citizens, their neighbors, and those who didn't. But this was a planned pogrom with the deep state, and it had been set up long before. What else to say on this? So, as I said before, this is very much a case of an organized attack using all the instruments of terror that the state had and inciting fear in the minority. And this was very much what was done. So let's talk numbers, because really, they say geography is destiny. Well, I'd say that demography is destiny. If you look at 1910, the Greeks were 31% of a population of 850,000. Around the time of Lausanne, they were again 31%. 1920s, 15%. In 1955, they were 4%. And look at the exponential growth of the Turkish population. The other major drop was after 1965, where Greek passport holders were expelled, and then of course, post-Cyprus, the numbers dropped further and further. And this continues to the point where now the population of Istanbul, Turkish Istanbul, is about the same as Greece and Bulgaria combined. And the population of Greeks is about the size of my community in Greenville, South Carolina. And let's not forget, this is not just any old Greek community. This is the community of the ecumenical patriarchate, okay? This is where all of our symbols of religion are. And there's 2,000 Greeks left as custodians. And of course, the work that the Archons are doing and all the Greek Orthodox faithful. But there's 2,000 people left. Demography is destiny. So, what are some of the other numbers? Well, you hear different numbers as to how many people were killed. Some of the sources I've looked at said around 40. 200 plus rapes, including rapes of men, thousands injured. What I find interesting too is the sheer economic damage. So in 2020 dollars, it was $5.8 billion in damage in about 18 hours. Okay, so think of the sheer destruction that was going on to do almost $6 billion of damage on a community of 65,000. Just imagine the degree of damage that was done. And then of course, you can't really monetize the damage to churches, to shops, to homes, to cemeteries, to factories. My specialty is economic history, so I focus a lot on that. I mean, you basically ripped out the economic base that could sustain really the most important community in Orthodox Christianity. They tore it out. So what do genocide scholars say? From the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the Septembriana satisfies the criteria of Article 2 of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, because the intent was to destroy in whole or in part the Greek minority. The pogrom had been organized by the government of Turkish Prime Minister Adnan Menderes. I'm sorry, I had omitted some items and I forgot to do the 3 dots, so apologies on that. It can be characterized as a crime against humanity comparable in scope to the November 1938 Kristallnacht in Germany, perpetuated by the Nazi authorities against Jewish civilians. It is a worthwhile read. It's not that long. I mean, obviously you've got incredible books like the late Dr. Spiros Briones, who wrote The Mechanism of the Catastrophe. But if you want a short, legalistic, non-emotive explanation of what happened, I really would commend you to read that particular article, because it goes into details, it provides you with all the information you need to make an unemotional but factual case that this was indeed genocide. So, this is the Bosphorus, which to me is one of the most beautiful spots on Earth, right? You're going between Europe and Asia. Has anybody taken a cruise along the Bosphorus? Yeah, it's fantastic. Has anyone driven along those former Greek villages, the fishing villages? Okay, of course. Those were Greek populated since antiquity. Since antiquity. Do I pronounce it correctly? The Yalis, or what? Yeah. So these beautiful Bosporan homes, most of them were owned by Greeks. Lots of them were fanariotes or cotton merchants, grain merchants from all over the Greek world. And even up to that point, so many of those villages remained at least partially Greek. So many of those properties, which now, Turkish oligarchs pay, tens of millions of dollars for, they were all Greek. According to a Constantinople Greek who I met when I did this same discussion in Chicago in September, there's 1 or 2 that remain in the hands of the Greek community. One is a famous restaurant, so next time you go there, let me know and I'll find out what it is. And it's remained in the hands of the Greek community as the sole exception that proves the rule. So not only did the Septembriana take place within Constantinople itself, but they went after all these Greek villages where there's so much Greek history and there was so much money. Right? There was such a long commercial history, all gone, all torn out of an indigenous population. I have to keep going on this. These were not immigrants that had set themselves up and then were expelled. They were indigenous, far more indigenous than the Turks who conquered this space. Do you know where this is, Ted? It's Anadolu Hisar, the castle of Asia. And of course, on the other side is Rumeli Hisar. So when I went, when we lived in Greece, my wife and I went to Constantinople, and I said I have to see the two castles, because the Turks called it Bogaz Kesin, and what do we call it? Lemokopia, the cutter of the throat. They called it the cutter of the channel. We called it the cutter of the throat. But nonetheless, it was a beautiful little village. And the taxi driver said these used to be room houses. Right? So the Turks themselves often know the truth there. But the map on the previous page shows you the extent of the destruction. This wasn't just shops or apartments in Constantinople. It was the removal of a population from Thrace. It was also the removal of the population from the Prince's Islands. Right? It's very important that this was basically targeting, with the exception, partially, of Imbros and Tenedos, the remaining Greek population in Turkey. This was outright pogrom against all of Romaeocene in Turkey. So the goal, destroy an indigenous population. Empty the seat of world orthodoxy, right? Because remember, that's what the Archons are all about, defending the ecumenical patriarchy. Well, the Turks are trying to eliminate the population, right? Because if you eliminate the population, then you have empty buildings, and you can slowly change the memories. That's why that the young man is here is very important. And I'll get into that a little further about what we can do or what we should try to do. Also, let's not forget, there's plenty of inter-Orthodox tension, right? So the whole question of the Patriarchate becomes a football between the Patriarchate and Russia. So it's an unfortunate truth that our fellow Orthodox are also involved in a situation that is only hurting, ultimately, the entire Orthodox family. To erase memory and to effect passive acceptance. So this is the School of Halki, which the Turks are constantly telling us they're going to reopen, and they'll never reopen. But this is where so many centuries of our clerics that spread throughout the world were trained. Well, that's the other thing. Shut down the schools. That's the best way to erase memory. This is cultural appropriation, people. But, of course, we don't call it cultural appropriation. Somehow, when cultural appropriation takes place against Christians or against, I don't know, should I say it, Europeans, it's somehow not cultural appropriation. I recall a discussion I had about cultural appropriation. I won't go into the location. And it seemed that all of the examples of cultural appropriation were colonialism or Europeans appropriating something that's non-European. So then I threw in my hat, of course, as the iconoclastic Greek, and I said, well, then can we talk about Hagia Sophia? I said, what would we call that? What about all the churches that have been converted to mosques? I mean, it's not just Hagia Sophia, right? It's the Hora Monastery, it's Hagia Sophia in Trapezunda. I mean, look, there's too many to count. Now, to be fair, in all of my travels, I've seen 3 mosques that have been converted to churches. Anyone know of any? There's one in Kavala. There's one in Pech, Hungary. And there's also the Mesquita of Cordoba.
We can find out. Famagusta in Cyprus.
There's a Famagusta, and of course we can't go to Famagusta anymore. So yeah, thank you, Congressman. But it's always the other way, right? It's always our churches become mosques, and that's okay. Has anyone seen the gallery in Hagia Sophia? My wife took this picture. Look, suppose you're not religious at all, but you're a lover of, cultural heritage. You're a lover of the cultural commons of humanity. That mosaic, it is as if our Savior is breathing. I've never seen anything like it. So to cover these mosaics really is a crime against culture. It's what I call janissarization. They take the edifice and they change it. This is janissarization, just as the Devshirme that was taking young boys and women from their families and then using them against their own people and their own families. Anyone read any of the books by the late Andrei Gerolimatos?
Maybe.
He wrote in one of his books, and he said that the Janissaries that marched against Constantinople they were dead to their families, and they marched as the undead against their own people. Okay? This is Janissarization. The Turks are very good at that. And, interestingly, it shows that so much of their culture is owed to us. Their greatest city is Constantinople. And as a journalist who was critiquing the Turkish film Fatih 1453, has anyone seen that? Okay. Look, I'm a fan of Turkish cinema. I think the Turkish cinema industry is extremely strong. This was not one of the good ones. This was completely schmaltzy. But the journalist said it only reminds the Turkish population that our greatest city and our greatest edifices were built by another and taken from another. So if you don't want to call it Janissarization, call it an edifice complex. The Turks certainly have that. So I talked about this a little bit before. Anyone know where that is?
That water?
The Quora. Okay, once again,
Beautiful.
absolutely beautiful. Reminding me of Neamoni and Chios or of Mistara. I mean, this is part of the cultural commons. Say you're not Greek, say you're not Christian, say you're an atheist, but you're a lover of art and culture. Why would you not want this display? What possesses people to cover those, right? It goes to another point, and I know I'm digressing a little bit, but has anyone heard of the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan? So they were created by a culture that was heavily influenced by Alexander the Great's successors, and of course by Buddhism. Among other countries, Greece begged the Taliban, let us disassemble it and bring it here if it's so offensive to you. Regardless of your religion, why would you destroy, why would you obscure such beautiful works of art? We have to talk about that. This isn't just a crime against the Greek community or a crime against Orthodox. This is a crime against the cultural commons. The more we talk about ourselves, not just to ourselves, but to our fellow Americans, to our fellow, citizens of planet Earth, we might be able to get somewhere. And we need to talk about indigenous rights, about Constantinople Greeks as the ultimate example of an expelled indigenous people. Why don't we talk about them? We have to flip this narrative of indigenous rights to include us. We have to flip the narrative of indigenous rights to include the beautiful, haunting monuments of Armenia that's in Turkey and not having Armenians anymore. We need to talk about why there's a ghost city of Fethiye. Why Nikia, where now there's going to be, the Pope is going to. Up until the 1920s, there was a sizable Christian population. What happened to those guys? Why don't we have a discussion about that? We need to effect that discussion. Right? Because it really is hypocritical when indigenous rights are only to certain peoples. But if we don't talk about it, it's easily forgotten. And it's not anyone else's fault if they don't know about it, if they haven't been taught about it, if they don't learn about it. So one of the challenges that we all have here, and the challenge that I think that those of you who live in the heart of American Romyosini have a challenge to, is to help educate our fellow Americans about this. So what's this? Come on, say it loud and proud.
The Ciprianos.
Yeah.
School
So it's operating since the 1450s, now not in this building. And Ted, what did you say, it was about the 1870s?
Yeah.
Okay. But the school's been operating since just after the conquest. But this year, there's no entering class. And this is a school that educated centuries of Greeks and Serbs and Bulgarians, you know, all of the Romani of the Ottoman Empire. This was Cambridge, this was Harvard, this was Oxford, right? And it's empty. This is our center of gravity. This is our Oxford. And now, what, in 3-4 years, no students. You know, the importance of this edifice and this institution to the Greek story is simply going to fade away. We can't let it simply fade away. I don't know exactly, I've got some ideas and we'll talk about it, and I want to hear from you about it, but that's what's at stake. The gravity of this place is comparable to a Harvard or a Cambridge. This is Karen. And on the Greek side, it's worth noting that while there's only a couple thousand Greeks left in Constantinople, Imbros, and Tenedos, there's well over 120,000 Muslims that live in Greece's province of Western Thrace. And in 1955, or 1964, or 1974, they did not suffer commensurate retaliation. Now, I'm not going to pretend that life was always easy for them. I'm not. But there were no pogroms. There was no state terror against them. So Greece kept its side of the Lausanne bargain, and Turkey did not. So I commend all of the organizations, for example, such as AHI, that stand for the rule of law. But this has to keep on being brought up, because Erdogan is basically saying that Lausanne is not worth the paper it's written on. We have to keep bringing this up. We have to be ready to go to court, because now the opposite is happening. Greece's lenience in leaving those people in Western Thrace, because it is a country of laws, is now going to be used against Greece, right? That Greece is abusing this minority, or that this minority has the rights to self-determination. That's already happening, and that will continue. So Greece, following the rules, is now going to get punished for the rules, because the existence of a minority is going to be used as evidence that Greece is abusing the minority. Of course, the Turks can say, what Greek minority, right? You remove the people, and then the memories are forgotten. So, I keep talking about building awareness. Well, how are we going to do this? We need to start asking questions of our fellow Americans. By the way, this is, anyone know where this is?
Diakonia sam.
The Diakonia. 45 minutes from my house, in the beautiful hills of the great state of South Carolina. The gentleman in the back called this particular place the Mistra of America. So, that guy back there. So I'm not going to take credit for that. I did write articles on that, and I did give you credit, Eric, but this space is holy ground. This space, to me, is really where you could have a resurrection of the thought that was in the Megal Tugen Skoli, in Mistra, and in all these other places. So, one summer during St. Stephen's Camp, I spoke to the students. I'm a little animated there with my, typical Greek gestures about Byzantium. Why Byzantium? The importance of Byzantium. Byzantium as the infrastructure in which your faith grew, right? So that we don't just jump from Alexander the Great straight into, 1821. What happened in between? We need to be talking about that. We need to be talking to our fellow Americans. What if I told you that Nicaea, where we recite the creed from, had a Christian community until 1923? What if I told you, as I've told Americans, our fellow Americans in various fora, that in the 1920s, Greece absorbed the equivalent for its size of 2 Californias without a head of household. Think about the chaos of the United States absorbing about 90 million people, destitute and traumatized. That's what Greece did. And then, of course, the question is, well, where were they from? Why did this happen? Well, then remind them, these were Greeks that had been resident for 3,000 years in Asia Minor and Thrace. These were indigenous people that were forcibly removed. And of course, they were the ones who were survivors of, call it by its name, a genocide. This was a genocide. These were survivors of genocide. Let's have the conversation. We have to have the conversation. What if I told you, and I love telling my Protestant friends, I say, when was the Bible translated? And what do they say? Luther. I said, really? What if I told you the 2 Thessaloniki boys translated the Bible into Slavonic 700 years before? So I have a neighbor who was a Lutheran pastor, and I told him how much I admired Luther for standing up to the Catholic Church, and said, but Cyril and Methodius had a jump on you of 700 years. And when we lived in Serbia, before my son started first grade, we were up at the Castra of Thessaloniki. And I said, you're going to learn the beautiful Serbian language, written in an alphabet invented here. We conquered a whole civilization, not with the sword, but with an alphabet army. Why aren't we ever talking about it? Who talks about Cyril and Methodius? Who talks about it? I've done other lectures where I showed pictures of my personal Greek heroes. Now, I love Alexander the Great, Pericles and everything, but who are my heroes? Constantine Palaiologos, Cyril and Methodius, and Rigas Phareos. To me, that is me. That is that they represent me. And of course, we all have to admire the, Periclean Athens and everything, but we have to tell the whole story. We have so much more of a story that we don't talk about. Leverage the Christian ethos of America. Ask the tough questions. Ask questions, we're constantly bombarded about stories of the Palestinians. Okay, understood. But what about the Syrian Christians that are being removed from their historic homeland? How indigenous are they? The Copts, everything. Where are these discussions? We're allowing the narrative to take place without us. And we are in the world of TikTok. I really don't like TikTok, I gotta say. Not a fan. I'm not a fan of trying to explain the world in 30 seconds. It doesn't work that way. But we're in the multimedia space. And we're losing. We're not even in the space. Right? We don't exist. We've got Big Fat Greek Wedding, which is adorable. I understand. We've got Maestro in Blue, which, again, great cinematography, interesting social commentary on what's going on in Greece. But where is Smyrna, My Beloved on Netflix? And I believe Netflix has a Greek CEO. I had the great honor, my daughter and I, to meet Ioannis Smaragdis in Nafplion when he was filming Kapodistrias. It was a great honor, and my daughter has pictures with, these mustache guys and fustanelas, and she says, wow, those are great stashes. It was an amazing opportunity for my daughter to see history being made. I want that on Netflix. Where is it? this. But instead, you have wonderful Turkish films. I mean, and again, huge fan of the cinematography. They often are not schmaltzy films. They're often very good. So, has anyone seen The Club, the Turkish series The Club? It refers to the pogrom obliquely, in a, let's say, a politically correct Turkish way. In other words, they don't dig into the deep state, but there's a clear message that that was wrong, right? But we have to get Greek history from the Turks. The rise of empires, Ottoman. Now I know Ted and I, we've talked about it, right? So we have to hear about Byzantine history from a Turkish prison. Now please, somebody tell me I'm wrong, and tell me that there is a Greek film about Byzantium or the fall of Constantinople. Tell me I'm wrong. Change my mind. Please, correct me. Tell me I didn't do my research. Anyone? Okay. So, 1,000 years of Greek history, not a film. The Turks are doing it, and even if they are attempting to be politically correct about it, or forget politically. That word bothers me in any number of ways. Historically correct. It's still coming from a Turkish prison. Where are we? We see social media of the Greeks in Hollywood. They're taking their selfies and all that. And Tom Hanks is a Greek, right? Well, okay, look, I love Mamma Mia. I love Big Fat Greek Wedding. But how about produce something that has something to do with this?
Yeah.
How about produce something like Kerkorian did about the Armenian genocide, The Promise? Where are those films? Don't we have enough talented cinematographers and actors? I know we do. Aren't we prominent enough in the United States, in media, and in culture? I know we are. And I know that we have certain friends among other ethnic groups. So why aren't we doing this? We need to be doing this. We need to ask those questions. Because we're losing in the multimedia sphere. The other thing I think that we need to do just in general, both as Greek Americans but as Greeks, we need to play the Byzantine card. Does anyone know where this is? What's that? St. Sava's Cathedral in Belgrade. It was the largest church in the Balkans. His Holiness was just present for the consecration of the church in Bucharest, which is apparently larger. My daughter and I went there this summer. It is Saint Sophia in splendor. But one of the most beautiful tributes to Byzantium was by a friend of mine in Australia, and if you notice by his surname, he's from Skopje. And he said, the longevity of over 1,000 years proved its authenticity, and authentic civilizations remain true unto themselves for a very long time, despite outside influences. So we may disagree about how to divide the ex-Ottoman world, but all the peoples of the Balkans, more or less, are Byzantine descendants. We need to remind each other that we need to play this Byzantine card. That's what Rigas Fereos died for. We've got things in our kit that we need to use. One of my favorite terms is asymmetry, and once again, this isn't my term. Greeks have always been very good at asymmetry. Look at the Battle of Salamis. Look at Thermopylae. Look at Greek fire.
Anyone know what Greek fire is? So when you hear about Europe being saved from the Arabs, in colloquial, let's say, conventional wisdom, what do you hear? What is the battle that they refer to? The Battle of Tours in France. What about this battle? What about the battle that burned the Arab fleet to a crisp? What about that? What about the asymmetry of Byzantium, of the Greeks? The use of technology, the faith, using all things to your benefit, improvising. Anyone who lives in Greece knows the Greeks are great at improvisation. We need to improvise in fighting this war, because it is a war. It's not a war, a conventional war, it's a hybrid war. Orthodox and Greeks have always been good at being asymmetrical. Let's look at some of our strengths. Look at the people assembled here. Look at the Greek diaspora. We control 20% of global shipping tonnage. 20%. The book I'm writing right now is about a group of Hyotes who were survivors of a Holocaust during the Greek Revolution that nonetheless set up a merchant network which controlled the world's grain and a good portion of the world's cotton. They didn't do it because there were many of them. They did it because they were asymmetrical. They knew how to trust one another and to use things to their advantage. Teach your children, just like the young man who's here. Talk to your fellow Americans.
Where's this picture at?
This is Constantine and Helena. Helena is my daughter. This is at Aio Costantino Church in Piraeus. So we were there on May 29th. We were getting ready to go to Hydra. We were going to the Nautical Academy's Alumni Association for their Thursday dinner. But I said to my daughter, we need to go there. Because she says, well, what happened? I said, it's the fall of Constantinople. So she says, well, will there be anyone there? I said, just watch. So we met parliament deputies, we met clerics, there was a marching band, and I said, I want you to go next to the last emperor. Because the first emperor was son of Helena, as was the last emperor. And I said, part of the reason that you're named Helena, first of all, it's a name that goes perfectly in Greek and in Serbian, but it's also because you have a name that was the name of the mother of our first and last emperor. So this is my synechia. Each of us has our own synechia. Each of us can be asymmetrical. And I invite you for that opportunity as we commemorate them and as the Archons are pledged to protect the ecumenical patriarch. Let's all think of ways that we can be asymmetrical in order to keep this synechia going. Over to you.
I want to thank Alex for an amazing presentation. It really brings to life the tragedy of what happened, and it's something that we really can't afford to forget. Who was it that said that if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat its mistakes? It's true. It's true. One thing I want to say before I take questions for Alex is he referred a number of times to the Rum, or the Romi. That really translates to the Romans, which is how the Turks have always called the Christian population in their territory. We I mean, the word Byzantine was made up by a German in 1600 something. I mean, we refer to it, and I use it all the time, and I love Byzantine history, but the Byzantines would never have understood what we meant if we said, you're Byzantines. They were Romans. They were the successors to the Roman Empire. They were the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East until 1453. Constantine XI, one of his last speeches was he was kind of being told by some of his ministers to call himself the Emperor of the Greeks, because that's what the Westerners, the Franks, were all calling him. He said, no, I am the Emperor of the Romans. Even though they appreciated their Greek history, to be an Elina in 1453 meant you were an ancient Greek and you had a different culture, you worshiped the Olympian gods. He says, I don't believe as they did. To be a Roman during that time period, there were two qualifications. One, you had to be an Orthodox Christian, not a Catholic, an Orthodox Christian. And two, you had to speak the language of the Romans, which was not Latin, it was Greek. So no matter what ethnicity you were, if you spoke Greek and you were Orthodox, you were a Roman. And that's part of our history that the Western powers have made us kind of give up. I love ancient Greece, and I love the fact that we're descended from them too, but there's that 1,000-year period between 300 AD and 1453 that we shined. There was a glorious empire that we are heirs to. So I'm proud to be a Roman. I hope you are too, even though it has nothing to do with Rome. So what I'd like now is to take questions from you all for Alex. Yes, Father.
First of all, fantastic.
Thank you, Father.
You covered a variety of topics, and I've encountered many of them in my various conversations with non-Orthodox and non-Greeks and what have you. But one, maybe you could give us some advice when you're talking about the destruction of churches and the conversion of churches into mosques. How have you found it successful when counteracted with what the Christians converted pagan temples into churches? There's that keeps getting thrown at me when I talk about churches being turned into mosques, and then it becomes this, well, the reality is in history, the conquerors, get to do whatever they want, and the Christians conquered the pagans, and so we took all their temples and made them churches. Sometimes we destroyed them. In your conversing with outside of our sphere, any success in dealing with that part of the conversation?
Father, that's a great question, and I don't always have the answer because that did take place. But I would refer to the Greek state's greatest monument, the Parthenon, because that's exactly what happened. The Byzantines converted it to a church. The Catholics, when they converted it to a Catholic church. The Ottomans converted it into a mosque. The Greek states, though, restored it to its original state as a temple, as a museum, as a monument. So, look, there's obviously been mistakes in the past, but I think the Greek state showed wisdom and showed correctness in making the Parthenon, non-religious, or if anything, a monument to the original goddess Athena. So I think that when I talk about it, I use that as an example. Look, if you go to one of my favorite churches in Athens, which is right next to the Mitropoli, that tiny Byzantine church, you see that they used stones from the ancients. And I forget the name. Eleftherios. Yes. These things certainly happened. Here's what I would say. In the case of the Byzantines, they were part of a synechia. If you look at Orthodoxy kept a lot of the cultural accoutrements of the ancients, a lot of the architecture of the ancients. I'm dancing, Father. I'm not giving a full answer, but it's a far greater answer than the wholesale conversion to a completely different faith. Yes?
What I'm hearing you say, again, using the ancient conversion as the example, it was Greek pagans who converted them into Greek churches. It wasn't an external conquest, stealing the temples and converting them into churches. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
You actually said it a lot better than I did. Yes. You said it better than I
Is
did.
that what you're saying?
I'm agreeing with you.
Is
Yes, but I didn't articulate it, so I'm borrowing that from you, Father. That's
It's
the
an
right
interesting
one.
concept that you brought up. Because, you know, for example, I've toured the Mayan and the Aztec ruins throughout the Yucatan and Mesoamerica. And of course, the Spanish tore down as many of those temples as they could and put their churches right on these places. Just like in our Southwest, a lot of the Indian divas had the church put right on top of them. And you know, that was the prevailing thought at the time, the right of conquest. You know, the prevailing civilization wins. But now we condemn it. But if we condemn it in Mexico City and we condemn it in Chichen Itza or you know, other places in Mesoamerica, why shouldn't we condemn it in Istanbul as well? You know,
I think that
Yeah, I just wanted-
Billinis said it.
yeah.
I just wanted to thank my good friend here. He's an amazing person. He's a true patriot. By the way, Father, I didn't hear him well because I don't hear very well. That church that I was a church that was converted to a mosque. Okay, and I remember residing in Angola, and you saw the sailboats. They described the sailboats in the church. And they don't say it's like in Angola, but I did a little research. It was actually a cathedral in Famagusta. But my good friend here is right. We need to do outreach. I chair the Religious Freedom Caucus in Washington, D.C., and of course the Hellenic Israel Alliance, and of course the Hellenic Caucus, which my dad founded many years ago. But I advocate on behalf of the Armenians because they help us, at least on the Hill we do, on our issues. You know, we need to help the Syrians, what's going on there, and the Assyrians who have no home. But I just want to commend him for what he does, and he says the truth, whether it's hurts or whether it's not a politician, and you give it all the facts correctly based on how you see them, and he's done a wonderful job throughout the United States. But we have to learn from him to do the outreach. In Nigeria, the Christians, and they're not getting a lot of attention. But I guess President Trump gave them some attention in the executive order just the other day. But they're being slaughtered by the Muslims. So I encourage you, and Gus, Ted does such a wonderful job, and the Archons do a great job. But we have to work together as a community to support our fellow Christians as well. So when I was on the plane on Air Force One during Trump's first term, he called me, and I don't know why, but he wanted to see me. First of all, I wanted to make sure that I was eating right. He said, "Heck, I'm close on that. If I got everything was okay, what have you." And then I got a tap on the shoulder and said, "The president wants to see you." And I said, "Okay, that's fine." And he just wants to chat with you. And I said, "All right, that's fine." And for 10 seconds, I thought of what I was going to talk to him about. And then I said the church, right away the church. And I gave him a history lesson of how our people in Turkey Christians throughout the Middle East have been persecuted. And of course I told him how much the Greeks loved him, and he loved that. They'll love me even more. But I went through every detail that I could think of. I didn't have a lot of time. He doesn't have a lot of patience, as you know. But I tell you, the next day he had a meeting, a cabinet meeting, and that was the day that he encouraged everyone and demanded that Pastor Brunson be released from Turkey. A lot of our people don't know our history. Just like you said, the Big Fat Greek Wedding, and Tom Hanks, I think he goes to church a couple times a year, whatever. I shouldn't criticize. I don't go every Sunday. But that's not what we're all about, okay? We should be very proud to be Orthodox Christians, and we have a great history. And our people here in the United States, because of our grandparents, we stand on their shoulders because they made such a great reputation for going once. And we need to take advantage of that because people are hungry to learn more about our history. I know what Ilis Paisios, that series in Greece, has done for the youth in Greece. They're coming back to the church, Father. They're coming back to the church. And that series is incredible, by the way. I don't know how to get it, but my kids get it for me on my app, on the iPhone, but it really is incredible. So anyway, I don't want to take too much time. I better leave, but Sister Patty's doing a Bible for me, and keep doing your good work, the Lord's work. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank God for Gus Billinis and his father, Mark Billinis. They have advocated for every issue to benefit the Orthodox throughout the world and the Greeks. And he's been our strongest advocate there. Thank you, Gus. And thank your father for us, too.
Tonight's presentation certainly brought back many memories. Constantinople and Byzantium is really embedded within me from the time I was in the seminary and was the first class to take modern Greek history and the history of the Patriarchate. Dr. Ted and I were blessed to be representatives from America at the first and only clergy laity that the Patriarch had in Constantinople. And I was very happy to have Ted with me because he was so fluent in the language, and I was a little shaky with being over there, but I was glad to have him. We all enjoyed St. Sophia's, and we were all saddened with what has happened. But more so, what has really torn me is that the Church of Hora is no longer. And visiting that church, Ted, was an experience that I'll never, ever forget. I've know a lot of people from this area of Constantinople, and my heart goes out to them because little by little, as we see, it's not going to be any longer. And that is a sad commentary on what's happening in the world. So thank you for bringing us back to me, the memories of Constantinople, and thank you.
History is easy to teach, and it's hard to create. My question is, the strategists who are there, I don't know, the church, the Archons, the diaspora, what is their strategy for the Immaculate Patriarch? I'll give you an example. Has there been any conversation of ever moving him out of Constantinople? I understand, 4th century, 1700 years ago. But where are we going to be talking about history, about how he got shoved out or our religion faded away in 1,000 years because we didn't act today. We saw the school is empty. We saw that the population is down to 2,000 people. So what are we waiting for? Who is acting or who has some strategy on paper that we can follow? It's great to teach our kids about history. Yeah, that's great. I'm not against it. But what are we going to do about tomorrow? Not yesterday. Tomorrow. That's my question. Thank you.
Great question. We'll let Alex-
Yeah, this is, we may have to tag team this. Well, part of that is, I don't know, okay? Because, and some of the conversations have been with Ted, I had thought maybe because the patriarch had been in exile during the Fourth Crusade, there is a precedent because it's not just Americans that operate on precedents, right? I mean, Orthodox operates on it. Well, they went to Nicaea. Could we not go to Thessaloniki, the second city of Byzantium? And also a city that is associated with other Orthodox peoples. I mean, it's sacred to the Bulgarians, to the Serbs. It's where Cyril and Methodius were from. I mean, there's a logic to it. But I'm convinced that because of conversations with people who know more than me, that there is a strong argument for holding out, even if it is, I don't want to use a corporate term like the headquarters, but all of the operations are elsewhere because of the symbolism of being there. So I'm torn. I have no strategy. My strategy is building a general awareness because, sir, I can tell you that when I talk to those young people, a lot of them did not know what Asia Minor was. And if you want, look, I'm from Hydra and I'm from Salt Lake, and the Salt Lake Greek community is known as being very direct. We're a little bit rough edged. That's why maybe we helped to win the revolution. How direct do you want me to be?
I'm just asking, is there something in the works, or is it even talked about?
I think that we have not done enough. I think that we've not had the direct conversation about what happened there, about what we're going to do, but we need to empower individuals such as Congressman Billinis, who has the ear of the president. We need to have a bipartisan representation in Congress, right? I have to ask the question why I had to beg to go and teach at Diaconia. I didn't ask for any money, and there was a constant pushback. All right, that's where I'm going direct, and I promised myself I wouldn't, but why not? When our own kids don't know what Byzantium was, and when I have to talk to people in the church about why this is important, why talking about 1,000-year civilization? You know what happened to my daughter in junior high when they were talking about European history? She asked, why don't we talk about Byzantium? And you know what the teacher's answer was? Well, yeah, but it didn't last very long. So my wife and I were both like, what? And she said, well, respectfully, sir, in her sweet voice, it lasted 1,000 years. Can you name another civilization? But there's the problem. If we're not empowering our children to push back, if we're not pushing back, if our church is not having this discussion at summer camps, I'm sorry, something's wrong. So, over to you before I get in trouble.
No. Angela, your question is asked because it really cuts to the chase. What is the strategy? And there isn't a unified one at this point in time. I mean, let the numbers do the talking. In 1900, 250,000 Greek Orthodox in Istanbul. At the Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, there were exchange of populations. 100,000 Greeks were allowed to stay in Istanbul. 100,000 Muslim, we call them Turks, but they were, they're Muslim Greeks in Thrace. now, after all this 1955, 1964, 1974, we are down to 2,000 people, mostly over the age of 70. 2,000, that's it. And while there's, I think my numbers tell me that there's 300,000 Muslims now in Thrace, out of the 100,000 that were supposed to be there. So they thrived, despite maybe some difficulties with the Greek government, but our population has dwindled to next to nothing. I asked the Patriarch personally in May. I had the blessing to be there with Archbishop Billinis, and I asked, I said, Your Holiness, what is it that we can do to help? You know, more than what we're doing. And you know, he looked at me, he smiled, and he said, move here. I mean, that you know, it's kind of a cutesy response, but there's truth to it. What he's saying is he needs a community to keep the institution and all of our history alive. Without people, we die. Okay? So there has to be, in my opinion, and this is a minority opinion, we have to do something with Turkey to show them how it is to their advantage to allow Greeks to move back, open businesses, and contribute to the Turkish economy and system, while not losing their own Greek identity. I believe personally that it would be great PR for them, you know, that it would reverse wrongs of history, and I think that it could bring in lots of money in tourism. But this is just a pipe dream of mine, if you will. If not, if that doesn't work, if it can't come to fruition, then the last Greek will die, and the Patriarch will have to move, because there always will be a Patriarch, and we'll have to deal with the consequences of that, which are geopolitical. I mean, you know, that Moscow then becomes preeminent instead of Constantinople.
If we act first, we control the scenario. That's, if we wait for disaster,
Well, it's not, I
then we
mean,
don't control the scenario.
we're basically in disaster. I mean, 2,000 people, right? Okay, they have to rotate the population around to the different churches just to fill a church for a service. You know, it's there. So unless we reestablish a community, the Patriarchate will eventually have to move, but it won't be during this Patriarch's lifetime, and probably not during the next one. But, you know, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, if there's no more Greeks, there is no more Patriarchate in Constantinople. It'll be the Patriarchate of Constantinople in residence in Thessaloniki, wherever, and that makes sense. But, you know, there's still time, and if there's time, there's hope. So, thanks.
John?
Yes. I know we're focusing specifically on Turkey and Constantinople and the Orthodox community there, but if Turkey is not open to the idea of allowing Orthodox Christians or Greeks to come back in, would you also consider that this is part of a greater Islamic movement to remove all non-Muslims out of the Middle East? So what you're seeing in Syria, obviously Saudi Arabia has been predominantly Muslim, very few non-Muslims that are citizens there. But in all of these countries, there is a pogrom over time where the goal is to get to 100% and not allow any other non-Muslims in those countries. This is just one myopic issue across a greater movement.
Well, that's a very good question, John. And I think that you know, certainly the record would show that that's tended to be the case. And I don't think that I think that you're very right to show that this is a microcosm of a macro problem. So I agree with you. I think, though, that Ted's point is very valid, and the fact that it is the seed of global orthodoxy. Maybe I'm using the wrong ecclesiastical term, and you know, forgive me if I am, but the fact that this is the seed of global orthodoxy, as Ted said, makes it a geopolitical issue aside from part of, to use the term again, a synechia of expulsion of non-Muslims from all of these countries. So I think that's a great point. Eric?
I actually have a question for both of you. Ted may know this thing. I've been hearing murmurs from different individual outlets on conversions that is fascinating. For anyone that doesn't know, my son's in university. He converted himself as president of the DNA test. And they were all basically Greeks that converted, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. I've been hearing murmurs of conversions in Turkey. Is there any numbers to Christianity? Orthodox?
Not reliable numbers.
Okay, so no reliable.
Well, I've heard those rumors too, but there's no real statistics that we can rely on. Certainly, nothing's going to come out of Turkey, and in Greece it may be played up, or just it's a game of telephone. One person says to another, and before you know it, half of Turkey is going to convert back to Christianity.
I guess part of my question is because the patriarch had a summer program under the hood
For preaching to them? No, under Islamic law, apostasy is punishable by death. So a Muslim who converts to Christianity could be punished by death. So it's probably not a good idea for him to try to convert Muslims. It's not a good idea in any Muslim country to try to do that. As the Americans found out when they sent missionaries over in the 1800s, and the missionaries found that out, and then they were going to convert all the barbarian Muslims. Well, they wound up trying to convert the Greeks and Armenians instead, because they were allowed to become Protestant. Do you want to add to
Well, the only thing I'd add, and I'll come back to you for a second, Sophia. The only thing I'd add is there is a lot of anecdotal evidence of crypto-Christianity in Turkey. You can't remove 3,000 years. Well, I know Christianity is not that old, but you can't remove a presence like that completely. There were people left behind. I've heard stories both in Greece and when I was in Serbia of priests visiting Turkey that were asked to do service. But that's really all I know. And of course, you do have. Has anyone heard of Uze Bulut? She's a Turkish.
media journalist.
Right. So look, there's obviously an insecurity with their wider history. Again, I'll go back to Turkish cinema. There's even examples in the Turkish cinema where they dig up, not literally, but like they find out about an Armenian ancestor, a Greek ancestor. To the degree that changes beliefs, I don't know. I mean, that's hard to say.
I have a number of Turkish friends. They're academics, and we'd be mistaken if we don't recognize the fact that there are, I don't know numbers, but I'm just, the people that I know are secular Turks. They're not adamantly religious, and I don't know how many there are. But the other point that I wanted to make is that some of us know this, we're aware of the fact that the Orthodox Church is growing. We have a number of young men sitting right here in this room who have come to the Orthodox Church after searching and trying to find true Christianity. And so the research that I do is pretty much not Facebook, but it's serious numbers. This is a serious and a movement, let's call it a movement. So a lot of Christians who have been of other denominations of Christianity are out there searching for the true Christianity, and they end up with Orthodoxy. So I think the church is growing, and even while we have these growing pains, and believe me, I'm the last person who would ever want to see patriarchy leave Constantinople, historically oriented. So I hope that never happens.
You know, I want to just make something clear that I don't hate Turks. In fact, many of them are my good friends. I don't hate Turkey. I don't hate Germany, but I hate Nazis. Okay? I think there's a difference. And the Nazis were responsible for horrible atrocities and terrible, terrible pogroms, as well as genocide. And that generation of the Turkish government was responsible for terrible genocide and horrible acts against the Greek Orthodox population. Alex didn't say it, but that president or prime minister at the time, Menderes, who helped orchestrate this whole 1955 thing, he was hung for his crimes by Turkish government later. In 1960, he was overthrown, and he and a couple of others were hung for the crime of starting that pogrom in Constantinople. So the Turks realized it, but a little late, and maybe not as fully as they should have. And of course, they didn't correct the wrongs; they just punished some of the perpetrators.
Yes, sir.
I want to compliment you on a very good theme, very informative. However, the theme gets us depressed, pain. Some of us have lived it. I went through the 50s in Greece and in Turkey. But what I want to share with everybody is when we live tonight, we must live with a positive thinking that our culture, the original church, the Christian Greek Orthodox Church, and our culture, going back to ancient Greece today, is admired in America and the world. Our culture is permeating America. Every aspect of America, you go to military academies that teach Greek history. Law schools teach the Socratic method. You go to any capital of this country, you're going to see Greek architecture. The academics, Americans, when we said, talk to fellow Americans, I asked if they speak Greek. They say, no, stop lying. If you don't know Greek, you cannot speak English. The fact, my friend, is the Greek language is over 100,000 words. Over 100,000 words. And we use about 10,000, 20,000 words daily. So we should live tonight with a positive. We are members of a great race and a great religion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think that's a great point, but let me just add something. Why is it that we stop at Socrates? Why do we forget 1,000 years? Why? And that is on us, because everybody stops at ancient Greece. So all of this isn't relevant. We don't even understand it. Okay? Therein lies the problem. And there's no question that Americans admire Greece. Let's not forget the American Philhellenes that went and fought, and many died for Greece. George Washington's nephew is buried on my island. Samuel Gridley Howe. There's another guy. Do Greek Americans know about him? Do they know? Because he certainly knew about Greece, ancient and modern. So, yes, you want to be more positive? I agree. We should be positive. We're survivors. We're asymmetric. We've always beaten the odds. But it's not enough just to cash in the dividend on the check of the ancients. We need to at least play the Byzantine hand. We need to look at more recent examples of Greek success and leverage those. That's all I would say to add to your wonderful point, though. Thank you. Yes, sir. Peter.
In regards to continuity, I would ask that the Archons talk to President Trump and ask him to demand, before this president's term is over, that he demands that Turkey reopen the case following in this school. That's the best thing that the Archons should be doing, should be focused on. And if they talk to President Trump, I'm sure he will make it happen.
Yeah.
They did bring up the issue, and that is what led to the next day when Erdogan met with Trump, that Trump brought it up. He did it half-heartedly. He kind of said, well, I was told to bring this up, opening up hockey school. Ultimately, we need to be prepared if in fact it is opened. What do we do with it? Are we capable of restoring that school, that historic structure, bring it back to its original glory? Can we, with the Greek government and the Greek Americans and the diaspora, come together and restore that facility if we are alive? Another quick, I guess, clarification in some ways. Imbros in 2019 had a Greek population of about 500, and now it's close to 1,000. That is largely due to Greeks, repatriating the island. So I think that's, I guess it shows that it's possible. For it to become possible, they would need rights. They're a religious minority, just like if they were to go back to Constantinople, they would need, a legal identity, just like the patriarchate lacks a legal identity. As far as the underground conversion to Christianity, my wife and I were on the airplane with His Eminence, Archbishop Billinis. It happened to be Turkish Air, because we were coming back from Constantinople, and the flight attendant whispered to the Archbishop that she would like to be christened on their layover in New York City. So she actually went to 79th Street to the Archdiocese offices and was christened as a Newport Baptist, which I thought that was kind of interesting. My question is, Megali Fali, the closure in October, due to structural concerns. We happen to have two engineers, Emanuele Vasakis being one of them, that from his review agrees that the school building is structurally unsound and needs work. I go back to Angela, what are we going to do as a community to help then rebuild, restore, reinforce, the dome? Ted, our regional commander, spoke to the director of that school. So I was going to ask, my question is, after those comments, is if you can, Ted, just touch on it, because I know it's late, what the plan is for the school.
So for those of you who didn't see the news, the school was suddenly shut down in, I believe, late September, because it was supposedly not safe for seismic activity. Immediately the Archons came out and spoke about yet another perpetration of the Turkish state against the Greek Orthodox. Well, I happen to know the director of the school from the last trip that I went there, and we became friends. And I had his number on WhatsApp, so I texted him, and he says, no, actually the studies that we've known about it for quite a while show that it is unsafe. The dome is in danger of collapse. It could be dangerous for the students. And we haven't been able to fix our own building for years because of lack of funds. And now we have to move out and find another place. And he told me that to make the corrections necessary to make that building safe will take 10 to 15 million euros. Now, there are 33 students in that school and none in the entering class. So what do you do? What do you do? Do we raise it from the Greek Americans? Do we get it from the government of Greece? And in order to preserve a building that at best will have 30-something students? This is tough. Reopening the School of Kalki. Thank God for Mr. Marinos in Athens, who is he's a ship owner, and he is an Archon from Europe, and he is spending millions of dollars to help renovate and make safe the School of Kalki in case it can reopen. But then again, we're going to need millions of dollars to make it worthy of training students. Is that possible when we can't even keep our own seminary in Boston functioning in the black? These are tough questions. These are tough questions. And it all boils down to, will there be a community to serve or not? So I want to thank you all for being here. I thank Alex for, again, a tremendous presentation. And for coming down here. I offered Alex an honorarium, and he said, no, I want to do this for the Greek community here. So he really, really believes strongly in this subject, and he's a great man. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Look,
Thank
I also believe a lot in you. I'm very proud to be your friend, and I love the community in the west coast of Florida. So
Maybe we can get you to-
it's a real honor to be here.
I want to thank my wife also. I want to thank my wife for preparing
We'll
the
talk.
refreshments that we'll all get to do it a little bit. And as a final note, to end on a positive note, because we believe in the resurrection, we believe in the immortality of the souls, I would invite all the clergy please to come up here and do a very quick Trisayum for those who fell during the pogroms of 1955. Father James, Father Jim, Father Athanasius, Father Mike.
Με τα πνευμάτων δικαίων
και τελειωμένων, τα των δούλων σου σώτερ ανάπαυσον, φυλάχων αυτάς, τη μακαρίαν ζωή την παρασύ φιλάνθρωπε, στην κατάπαυση σου Κυρίου που πάντες οι Αγίοι σου αναπαύοντες, ανάπαυσον και τας τριχάς των δούλων σου, ότι μόνος υπάρχεις ο θάνατος, δόξα Πατρί και Υιό και Αγίο Πνεύματι, Συ ο Θεός ημών κατά βάσης άδειν και τας οδύνας λύσας των πεπαιδημένων, αυτός και τας ψυχάς των δούλων σου σώτερ ανάπαυσον και νίκαια ή και εις τους αιώνας των αιώνων αμήν, ημών η αγνή και ο άκραντος Παρθένος, η Θεόν Ευφράστος και Ισάσα. Πρέσβερε, πες του ελεηθήνε και συγχωρηθήνε τας ψυχάς των δούλων σου.
Let us pray to the Lord.
Lord, have mercy.
For your resurrection, the life and repose of your departed servants, those who suffered in the pogrom in 1955 in Constantinople, Christ our God. And to you we send up the glory as to your Father, who is from everlasting, your all holy, good life, King, Spirit, both now and forever in the age of ages.
Amen.
Everlasting be remember your sisters and brothers.
Αιωνία σας η μνήμη, αιωνία σας η μνήμη.
Όλοι μαζί.
Αιωνία η μνήμη, αιωνία η μνήμη, αιωνία αυτόν η μνήμη.
Διεπών των Αγίων Πατέρων ημών, Κύριε Ιησού Χριστέ ο Θεός, ελέησον και σώσον ημών. Χριστέ ο Θεός, πνευλώσεις τους πρόσωπους, πώς των δούλους και άλλους υπάντων νικαίοι και εις τους αιώνας των αιώνων. Αμήν. God bless you. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Dr. Ted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, fathers.